The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, demanding I pay $47,000 in fines for living in a house I'd owned for 12 years. Except I wasn't even in their HOA. Picture this. I'm standing in my kitchen, coffee mug steaming in my hand, staring at legal papers that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Outside my window, there's Karen Whitmore, HOA President Extraordinaire, pointing at my house from her perfectly manicured lawn like she's directing an invasion. The morning dew sparkled on her grass, you know, the kind that gets measured with rulers to ensure it meets community standards. My reaction? I took another sip of coffee and thought, "Lady, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." What would you do if someone tried to force you into an HOA you never joined? Drop your wildest HOA horror story below. I guarantee mine tops them all. And before we dive into this legal thriller, where are you watching from? I'm curious how many of you are dealing with neighborhood tyrants right now. My name's Garrett Mitchell, and 12 years ago I thought I'd bought my slice of the American dream. Turns out, I'd walked into a nightmare designed by a woman who makes dictators look reasonable. 2011. Fresh out of the Army after 2 tours in Afghanistan, I used my VA loan to buy 2.3 acres of pure freedom. The 1970s ranch house sits on the original Hendricks farm. We're talking pre-subdivision, when this area was still cow pastures and common sense. Willow Creek runs between my property and the fancy Willowbrook Estates development, and that babbling water became my daily reminder that some boundaries are carved by nature, not lawyers. I'm an independent contractor, electrical, plumbing, whatever keeps food on the table for me and my 16-year-old daughter, Emma. After my divorce, this place became our fortress of sanity. I built a workshop where the sweet smell of pine sawdust mixes with WD-40, and every morning I can taste the clean air that doesn't exist in subdivisions with their chemical lawn treatments. Emma loves it here. She's got space to breathe, creek access for catching tadpoles, and a dad who's actually present instead of deployed. Then came Karen Whitmore, the human equivalent of a homeowners association fever dream. Karen's 52, drives a spotless white Lexus that's never seen a speck of mud, and rules her $800,000 McMansion kingdom like Marie Antoinette with a measuring tape. 6 years as HOA president have turned her into a suburban surveillance specialist who knows every neighbor's garbage day schedule and lawn mowing frequency. Her husband Brad isn't just some passive bystander, he's county planning commissioner. That detail becomes crucial later, but for now, just file it away under massive conflict of interest. The first encounter happened at my mailbox on a Tuesday morning. Karen marched across the street wearing pearls and indignation, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. The crunch of gravel under her designer heels announced her approach with all the subtlety of incoming artillery. "Your workshop violates neighborhood standards," she declared, not bothering with introductions. I looked at my property, then at hers across the creek, then back at her. "Ma'am, I appreciate the concern, but I'm not in your HOA." Her smile could have flash frozen coffee. "We'll see about that." That was 18 months ago. What followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Karen began timing my work schedule with military precision, photographing every visitor like she was building a surveillance file. She'd appear at her window whenever I fired up power tools, arms crossed, radiating disapproval across 47 feet of creek bed. The woman actually bought binoculars. But Emma's 16th birthday party pushed Karen over the edge. Nothing wild, just backyard barbecue with friends, music until 9:30 p.m., perfectly legal under county noise ordinances. Karen called police twice that night. Both times, officers found 0 violations and left shaking their heads. One cop even grabbed a burger, joking that our party was the tamest disturbance he'd seen all week. The next morning changed everything. Emma found the violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper, expensive legal paper that felt wrong between my fingers, too official for such obvious nonsense. It listed my workshop, garden fence, and gravel driveway as unapproved exterior modifications carrying $500 fines each. "Dad," Emma said, studying the document like it might bite her, "this woman has seriously lost her mind." Yeah, and here's what Karen was betting on. That I'd fold like every other working-class family she'd terrorized into submission, pay up, shut up, tear down my workshop, and fall in line with her suburban police state. She'd done her homework on intimidation tactics but failed Basic Research 101. Because if Karen had bothered checking county records, she'd have discovered something that would have saved everyone 18 months of legal warfare: My property was intentionally excluded from her HOA for reasons that would eventually destroy her entire empire. But narcissists don't research, they just attack. I poured fresh coffee, walked to my fence line, and stared across Willow Creek at Karen's perfect house with its perfect lawn and perfectly corrupt foundation. "Lady," I told the morning air, "you just declared war on the wrong veteran." The creek kept flowing, completely indifferent to human drama, which, as it turns out, was exactly the right attitude for what was coming next. 3 days after Emma's birthday party, Karen launched her opening salvo with the precision of a suburban missile strike. The official HOA violation notice arrived via certified mail because nothing says "I mean business" like making someone sign for their harassment. This wasn't some hastily scribbled complaint. This was a full-color, professionally printed document that probably cost more than most people's monthly phone bills. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, with that slick coating lawyers use to make nonsense look official. The violations read like a property owner's nightmare. Unapproved exterior modifications including but not limited to unpermitted workshop structure, non-conforming fence materials, unauthorized gravel driveway surface, and failure to maintain landscaping standards consistent with community aesthetic guidelines. Each violation carried a $500 fine. 30 days to comply or face escalated enforcement action including liens and legal proceedings. I had to admire Karen's commitment to bureaucratic intimidation. Too bad she'd forgotten one tiny detail. My first stop was the county courthouse, where the musty smell of old documents and decades of legal drama filled the air like a library that specialized in human conflict. The clerk, a patient woman named Dorothy who'd seen every property dispute imaginable, helped me pull my original deed from 1970. Back in Afghanistan, our intel officer used to say, "Always verify with primary sources, secondary sources lie." Turns out that advice works just as well for property law as it does for avoiding IEDs. The deed was crystal clear. My property boundaries, recorded and surveyed, predating Willowbrook Estates by 40 years. Survey measurements showed exactly what I suspected. I was 47 feet outside HOA jurisdiction, separated by Willow Creek, and protected by natural boundary law. Just to be thorough, I called the HOA management company. The confused receptionist put me on hold 3 times before admitting they had no record of my address in their system. "Sir, if you're not in our database, you're not in our HOA," she said, like she was explaining basic math to a kindergartner. I should have known Karen wouldn't accept reality gracefully. 2 days later, she showed up at my door with reinforcements. Her brother-in-law, Rick, a part-time surveyor whose biggest qualification seemed to be owning an orange vest and a measuring tape. The smell of Rick's cheap cologne mixed with Karen's desperation as they stood on my porch, trying to look official while spouting complete nonsense about adverse creek migration and updated boundary assessments. Here was Karen's first real tactical error. She claimed the creek boundary had shifted over time and demanded access to re-establish proper property lines. "Ma'am," I said, holding up my county-certified survey, "water doesn't move property lines. That's not how law works." Karen's face flushed red. "We'll see what my attorney says about that." But here's where Karen made her fatal mistake. She'd tipped her hand about hiring lawyers before she'd done her homework. While she was busy playing property line police, I was discovering something explosive about Willowbrook Estates' founding. Mrs. Patterson, my 83-year-old neighbor who remembered when this area was still cow pastures, invited me over for coffee and the kind of gossip that changes legal cases. Her kitchen smelled like vanilla and justice as she laid out the real story. "Strangest thing," she said, stirring sugar into her cup with the slow precision of someone who'd outlived 3 HOA presidents. "The original subdivision plans clearly showed your property excluded from the development. Environmental concerns," they said. "Something about the creek flood zone." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "But Brad, that's Karen's husband, pushed the approval through anyway. His construction company got the contract for 60% of those houses. The pieces clicked together like a puzzle solving itself. My old army training kicked in. When the enemy reveals a pattern, you exploit it." The next violation notice arrived a week later, this time claiming my property created a nuisance affecting community property values. Karen had escalated from fines to threats, warning about liens and foreclosure proceedings. She'd also apparently hired Pembroke & Associates, the kind of law firm that advertises on billboards and charges by the intimidation factor. But Karen's intimidation campaign had backfired spectacularly. She'd created her own resistance movement. The Kowalski family approached me at the grocery store, speaking in hushed tones like we were planning a revolution in the produce aisle. They'd been forced to remove their kid's swing set because it violated aesthetic guidelines, $8,000 in modifications to satisfy Karen's suburban dictatorship. "She told us we could face legal action if we didn't comply," Mrs. Kowalski whispered. "We couldn't afford to fight it." Mrs. Patterson mentioned the Rodriguez family, who'd moved away after Karen's harassment escalated to calling their employer. A pattern emerged. Karen targeted working families who couldn't afford extended legal battles, while mysteriously ignoring violations by wealthier neighbors. The beautiful irony? While Karen was busy hiring expensive lawyers and printing color violation notices, she was actually building my case for me. Every interaction, every phone call, every attempt at intimidation was being quietly documented. The creek kept flowing between our properties, marking a boundary that no amount of legal bluffing could change. Karen thought she was fighting a simple property dispute. She had no idea she'd just handed me the ammunition to destroy her entire empire. Karen's next move came with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer wrapped in legal letterhead. 2 weeks after my courthouse visit, a thick envelope from Pembroke and Associates landed in my mailbox with the weight of expensive intimidation. The cease and desist letter was a masterpiece of legal theater, 4 pages of whereases and heretofores demanding I immediately stop all unauthorized activities and submit to HOA jurisdiction. But here's where Karen revealed she'd been watching too many legal dramas. The letter claimed my property created a continuing nuisance affecting HOA home values and demanded I grant them access to install proper boundary markers on my land. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted permission to trespass so she could prove I was trespassing. I'd seen this playbook before. In the Army, we called it escalation through paperwork. When someone can't win through legitimate channels, they bury you in official-looking nonsense hoping you'll surrender from exhaustion. My response was swift and surgical. I contacted Janet Reeves, a local attorney who specialized in veterans' rights and had a reputation for eating bullies for breakfast. Janet took one look at Karen's legal threat and actually laughed out loud, not the reaction expensive lawyers usually inspire. "Garrett," she said, her office smelling like leather-bound law books and righteous indignation, "this woman just handed us a harassment case on a silver platter." Janet's counter cease and desist was poetry in legal form, 3 paragraphs citing property rights law, harassment statutes, and a warning that further contact would result in immediate legal action. She also included a helpful reminder that demanding access to private property without legal authority is called attempted trespass. Karen's reaction was predictably unhinged. Within days, she'd organized an emergency HOA meeting about the boundary dispute crisis. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as Karen spread her gospel of property value panic. She'd prepared charts showing how my illegal business operation was supposedly driving down everyone's home equity. The accusation stung because it was partially true. I did occasionally use my workshop for contract jobs. But here's what Karen didn't understand about small business law. Home-based businesses are perfectly legal when properly zoned and licensed. My electrical contractor's license was current, my insurance was paid up, and my property was zoned for exactly this type of work. But facts never stopped a good propaganda campaign. Karen's whisper network went into overdrive. Suddenly, my neighbors were receiving concerned citizen updates about the unlicensed contractor operating an illegal business next to their children. She'd turned neighborhood gossip into a precision weapon, targeting anyone who might support my position. The pressure campaign escalated when county code enforcement showed up at my door. Not randomly, but in response to multiple anonymous complaints about zoning violations. The inspector, a weary man named Phillips who'd clearly seen this dance before, spent 30 minutes confirming what I already knew. Everything was legal, licensed, and properly permitted. "Off the record," Phillips said as he packed up his clipboard, "whoever's filing these complaints is wasting everyone's time. Your setup is cleaner than most commercial operations I inspect." But Karen wasn't done with her surveillance operation. My security cameras, installed after the first violation notice, captured something incredible. Karen's brother-in-law, Rick, creeping around my property at dawn, placing orange survey stakes in strategic locations. The footage showed him measuring distances with a tape measure, then deliberately positioning markers to make it appear my workshop encroached on HOA territory. When I confronted Rick directly, he stammered something about preliminary measurements and fled like a teenager caught vandalism. The smell of his nervous sweat lingered in the morning air long after his pickup truck disappeared. Emma started feeling unsafe walking to her school bus. Teenage girls have radar for adult drama, and she'd noticed Karen timing her daily surveillance drives to coincide with Emma's schedule. One morning, Emma found Karen parked at the creek bridge, photographing our house with a telephoto lens like some suburban paparazzi. "Dad, this is getting seriously creepy," Emma said over breakfast, her voice carrying the edge that comes from feeling watched in your own home. That's when I knew Karen had crossed the line from harassment into intimidation. My old platoon sergeant used to say, "Document everything because crazy people reveal themselves if you give them enough rope." Karen was weaving her own legal noose with every escalating move. The community Facebook group Willowbrook Neighbors exploded into competing narratives. Karen's supporters posted about property values and community standards, while a growing number of residents shared their own stories of HOA harassment. The comment threads read like a civil war fought in emoji and passive-aggressive suburbanite language. But the most revealing moment came when Mrs. Patterson quietly mentioned she'd been recording Karen's meetings for years, just in case someone needed evidence of the HOA president's true character. "Honey," she said, pouring tea with the steady hands of someone who'd survived 8 decades of neighborhood drama, "I've got recordings that would curl your hair." That's when I realized Karen hadn't just picked a fight with me. She'd accidentally declared war on the entire neighborhood's collective memory of her abuse. The creek kept flowing, indifferent to human stupidity, while Karen built the case against herself one paranoid move at a time. Karen's nuclear option arrived on a Thursday morning that started like any other, until the sheriff's deputy knocked on my door serving papers for a $47,000 lawsuit. The complaint read like a fever dream written by someone who'd overdosed on legal television. Karen wasn't just demanding accumulated fines anymore. She was claiming I'd somehow agreed to HOA membership by the simple act of owning property within a 5-mile radius of her subdivision. The lawsuit demanded immediate compliance with all HOA regulations, an injunction preventing any further property modifications, and enough legal fees to buy a decent car. Sitting in Janet's office, the morning sunlight streaming through windows that had probably witnessed 1,000 property disputes, I watched my attorney's expression shift from professional concern to barely contained rage. "Garrett," Janet said, flipping through pages of Karen's legal fiction, "this woman is either completely delusional or running the most expensive bluff in county history." But Janet's deep dive into Karen's background revealed something far more sinister than delusion. Court records showed Karen had filed 6 previous boundary disputes over the past decade. 3 families had moved away rather than fight expensive legal battles. The Rodriguez family, the ones Mrs. Patterson mentioned, had actually lost their home to foreclosure after legal fees mounted beyond their ability to pay. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance. She was a serial predator who targeted working-class families with surgical precision. The pattern was chilling. Identify families who couldn't afford extended litigation, manufacture violations, escalate legal pressure until they either complied or fled. Wealthy neighbors mysteriously never faced the same scrutiny for identical violations. While I was processing the scope of Karen's operation, she launched her media offensive with the coordination of a political campaign. Local TV news received calls about a property value crisis, threatening responsible homeowners. Karen staged photo ops showing herself maintaining community standards, while pointing dramatically at my workshop like it was a nuclear waste facility. The Channel 7 story aired with the headline, "HOA Battle Divides Neighborhood," featuring Karen in her best pearls explaining how one person's refusal to follow rules was destroying property values for hardworking families. They didn't interview me because Karen had told them I was unavailable for comment, which was news to me since nobody had tried to contact me. But Karen's media blitz backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Emma's friend Madison, daughter of the Kowalski family, became our inside intelligence source during sleepovers that doubled as resistance meetings. Through teenage social networks that would impress CIA operatives, I learned Karen had promised lower HOA fees to neighbors who supported her lawsuit. More damaging, Madison overheard Karen bragging to her book club about how she'd finally found a way to get rid of that contractor and his noisy workshop. The conversation, recorded on Madison's phone while she pretended to do homework, revealed Karen's true motive wasn't property values, it was personal vindictiveness. The harassment campaign escalated beyond legal boundaries into outright sabotage. Someone scattered roofing nails across my driveway, puncturing 2 tires on my work truck. The smell of rubber and betrayal filled the morning air as I knelt beside my disabled vehicle, picking metal fragments from the treads. Emma's car got keyed in the school parking lot, long, deliberate scratches that spelled out "move" across her driver's side door. Watching my 16-year-old daughter try not to cry while examining the damage, I felt something shift inside me from defensive to offensive. Anonymous flyers appeared throughout the neighborhood, featuring grainy photos of my workshop with text warning about unlicensed electrical work endangering your family's safety. The flyers listed my business phone number, encouraging concerned citizens to report dangerous violations to the state licensing board. The investigation found no violations because there weren't any, but Karen's strategy was working. Several of my regular clients received warning calls about hiring unlicensed contractors. My business income dropped 30% as nervous customers chose other electricians rather than risk involvement in neighborhood drama. During one particularly surreal evening, I caught Karen parked across the creek with binoculars, timing my work schedule with military precision. When our eyes met through her lenses, she didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed, just wrote something on her clipboard and drove away. The psychological pressure was designed to break me, but Karen had made one critical miscalculation. She'd never fought someone who'd survived actual combat stress. Compared to insurgent attacks in Afghanistan, suburban psychological warfare felt like performance art. Janet's research uncovered the smoking gun that would change everything. Original county planning documents from 2009 that explicitly recommended excluding my property from the subdivision due to creek flood zone regulations. The Environmental Impact Study, a document Karen's husband Brad had access to as planning commissioner, clearly stated that my parcel should remain separate for ecological preservation. Karen and Brad both knew my property was intentionally excluded, yet they'd spent 18 months claiming the opposite. This wasn't a boundary dispute anymore. This was fraud, conspiracy, and harassment wrapped in legal paperwork and suburban respectability. The creek kept flowing, carrying away Karen's credibility one lie at a time, but she wasn't finished destroying herself yet. The discovery that changed everything came from the most unlikely source, a filing cabinet in the basement of the county courthouse that smelled like mildew and forgotten justice. Janet's paralegal, a tenacious woman named Sarah who treated legal research like archaeological excavation, had been digging through 2009 environmental impact studies when she found the smoking gun buried beneath 15 years of bureaucratic paperwork. The document was titled Willowbrook Estates Environmental Assessment, and it read like a prophecy of Karen's downfall. The study explicitly recommended excluding my property, referred to as Parcel 47B, the Hendricks homestead, from any subdivision development due to creek flood zone regulations and ecological preservation requirements. But here's where it got interesting. The environmental engineer's signature was followed by a handwritten note in the margin that made my blood run cold. Commissioner Whitmore advised of flood zone concerns, exclusion mandatory for EPA compliance. Brad Whitmore, Karen's husband, hadn't just known about my property's exclusion. He'd been officially warned that including it would violate federal environmental law. Janet spread the documents across her conference table like pieces of a conspiracy puzzle. Garrett, this gets worse. Look at the incorporation papers for Willowbrook Estates HOA. The HOA's founding documents contained a signature I recognized but had never seen before. Robert Hendricks, previous owner, Parcel 47B. The problem? Robert Hendricks had been dead for 6 months when that signature was allegedly notarized. Handwriting analysis would later confirm what we suspected. Someone had forged a dead man's consent to include my property in an HOA that legally couldn't include it anyway. But the real revelation came when Sarah cross-referenced property tax records with Karen's financial history. Karen's pristine McMansion was drowning in debt, 3 mortgage refinances against inflated property values, with monthly payments that required her neighborhood to maintain artificial value inflation or she'd face foreclosure. She's been using HOA harassment to prop up property values, Janet explained, pointing to a graph showing home sale prices in Willowbrook versus surrounding areas. Every family she's forced to renovate or relocate has artificially maintained her equity bubble. The lawsuit wasn't about community standards. It was about Karen's financial survival, Mrs. Patterson's treasure trove of recorded HOA meetings provided the final piece of evidence we needed. Her ancient cassette recorder had captured Karen's true confessions during what she thought were private board discussions. The most damaging recording was from March 2022. That contractor's property technically isn't included in our jurisdiction, but he'll never fight us. Working people can't afford lawyers. We just keep the pressure up until he complies or moves away. Another gem from June 2022. Brad says we can't legally force him to join, but what's he going to do? Hire an attorney? People like that always fold when you throw enough legal paperwork at them. Karen had been running a protection racket disguised as an HOA, targeting families based on their perceived inability to fight back. The most chilling recording came from August 2022, just after Emma's birthday party. I've finally found a way to get rid of that veteran and his noisy workshop. We'll bury him in legal fees until he breaks. 23 minutes of Karen's own voice, recorded by a sweet old lady who'd pretended to nap during meetings while documenting every word of the conspiracy. But the coup de grace was discovering that Brad's construction company had built 60% of the homes in Willowbrook Estates, homes sold at inflated prices because buyers believed they were purchasing into a legally constituted HOA with established property standards. Every sale was potentially fraudulent. Every HOA fee collected was theft. Every violation fine was extortion. Karen and Brad hadn't just harassed me, they'd defrauded an entire neighborhood for over a decade. Sitting in Janet's office, surrounded by evidence of systematic fraud, I realized the scope of Karen's vulnerability. This wasn't a property dispute anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy that could unravel their entire financial empire. The question wasn't whether I could win. The question was whether I wanted to completely destroy 2 lives or settle for justice. Emma's keyed car and my family's 18 months of harassment answered that question pretty definitively. Karen had declared war on the wrong veteran. Now she was about to learn what total victory actually looked like. The War Council convened in my workshop on a Saturday morning that smelled like coffee, sawdust, and righteous indignation. Janet spread legal documents across my workbench while Mrs. Patterson arrived with a thermos of coffee strong enough to fuel a legal revolution. The Kowalski family joined us, along with Rodriguez, via video call from their new city, an army of Karen's victims finally ready to fight back. Emma took notes on her laptop, treating the strategy session like the most important school project of her life. Watching my 16-year-old daughter document evidence of adult corruption, I felt proud and heartbroken in equal measure. "Here's our battle plan," Janet announced, organizing documents with the precision of a general plotting invasion. "We file a motion to dismiss Karen's lawsuit based on fraudulent HOA incorporation. Simultaneously, we launch a countersuit for harassment, business interference, and conspiracy. Then we request an emergency injunction preventing the HOA from collecting any fees while we prove their entire legal foundation is built on lies." Mrs. Patterson's cassette recordings were transcribed and authenticated by a court stenographer who'd heard every type of confession imaginable, but admitted Karen's casual discussion of targeting working families was uniquely disturbing. The audio quality was surprisingly clear. Apparently, Mrs. Patterson's ancient recorder captured Karen's voice better than modern digital equipment. The evidence assembly felt like building a case against organized crime. County planning documents were organized chronologically, showing Brad's systematic abuse of his position. Financial records revealed the conflict of interest. Brad's construction company had profited from every family Karen forced into expensive modifications. Video evidence from my security cameras documented 18 months of harassment, property boundary manipulation, and attempted intimidation. The footage of Rick placing fake survey stakes was particularly damaging, clear evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Sarah Morgan, our inside intelligence coordinator disguised as a teenage sleepover enthusiast, had recorded Karen's book club confessions about getting rid of that contractor. The audio, captured on Madison's phone while she pretended to do homework, revealed premeditation that transformed harassment into criminal conspiracy. "Dad," Emma said, looking up from her notes, "this woman basically confessed to everything on tape. How stupid is she?" "Arrogant," Mrs. Patterson corrected, stirring sugar into her coffee with the patience of someone who'd outlived 3 neighborhood tyrants. She thought she was untouchable because she'd never faced real resistance. Our media strategy centered on investigative reporter Sarah Morgan, who specialized in municipal corruption and had been following HOA fraud cases statewide. Janet prepared a press release documenting not just my harassment, but the pattern of targeting working families across multiple years. The technical preparation required experts who could translate Karen's crimes into language judges and juries would understand. A professional surveyor confirmed the original boundary measurements. while an environmental engineer validated the 2009 flood zone study that Brad had ignored. The handwriting expert's analysis of the forged incorporation documents was devastating. The signature attributed to Robert Hendricks shows clear signs of simulation. The writer was copying from a known sample rather than writing naturally. Additionally, the deceased date precedes the signature date by 6 months, making forgery the only possible explanation. Financial auditors discovered that HOA funds had been systematically misappropriated to pay for Karen's legal campaigns against individual homeowners. Residents had been unknowingly funding their own harassment through mandatory association fees. Behind enemy lines, Madison reported increasing panic at Karen's house. Brad had been spotted shredding documents in his garage, an act photographed by alert neighbors who'd finally realized their HOA president might be a criminal. Karen was attempting to borrow money for escalating legal fees, while the HOA management company considered dropping Willowbrook from their client list. Our psychological warfare campaign was subtle but effective. I began obvious preparations for a major workshop expansion, ordering lumber, concrete, and electrical supplies in quantities that suggested permanent, large-scale construction. The building permits were perfectly legal and properly filed, but Karen's visible blood pressure spikes during her daily surveillance drives suggested the strategy was working. Local support materialized from unexpected sources. The electricians' union offered financial backing for their members' harassment case. Veterans organizations provided legal fund donations after learning about military family targeting. The environmental group became interested in creek protection angles, while 3 current HOA board members privately indicated willingness to testify against Karen's leadership. The most valuable intelligence came from understanding HOA transparency laws that Karen had been violating for years. Most residents didn't know they had legal rights to inspect financial records, review board meeting minutes, and challenge assessments through state sunshine laws. Here's what Karen never understood, Janet explained, organizing our attack strategy. HOA boards must provide complete financial transparency to homeowners. Every secret assessment, every legal fee, every consulting contract is public record that members can demand to see. By Sunday evening, our workshop had been transformed into a legal command center. Evidence boxes lined the walls, expert testimony was scheduled, and our media campaign was ready to launch. Emma looked up from her laptop where she'd been researching similar cases nationwide. "Dad, Karen's not just going to lose this lawsuit, she's going to jail, isn't she?" The creek bubbled its approval outside, flowing toward Karen's house where justice was about to flood her perfect suburban kingdom. War was coming to Willowbrook Estates, and Karen had provided all the ammunition we needed. Karen's desperation reached new heights when she showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening with an offer that reeked of panic and cheap perfume. "Let's be reasonable adults about this," she said, clutching a folder like it contained the secrets of suburban diplomacy. "I'm prepared to settle this whole misunderstanding for $15,000, a fraction of what you owe, really." Standing on my porch in her designer blazer, Karen looked like a real estate agent trying to sell swampland to tourists. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd demanded $47,000 in fraudulent fines was now begging me to accept a generous settlement that would still cost me more than my truck was worth. "Ma'am," I replied, leaning against my doorframe with the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards, "I don't negotiate with extortionists." Her smile cracked like cheap paint in summer heat. "You'll regret this decision, Mr. Mitchell." Karen's retreat into personal warfare marked the beginning of her most destructive phase. Within days, whispers began circulating through neighborhood social media about my military service. Anonymous posts suggested I was a dangerous veteran with PTSD who posed a safety risk to neighborhood children. The accusation hit like a punch to the gut, not because it was true, but because it weaponized prejudice against veterans while attacking my relationship with Emma. Anyone who knew me understood I was about as dangerous as a golden retriever with a tool belt, but Karen was counting on fear overriding facts. The Sabotage campaign escalated beyond psychological warfare into actual destruction. Someone cut my workshop's main power line with bolt cutters, leaving the severed cable dangling like a severed nerve. The acrid smell of electrical burning filled the morning air as I surveyed damage that could have caused a fire if I hadn't caught it early. My security cameras captured everything. A figure in dark clothing approaching at 3 a.m., cutting the line, then fleeing toward the creek. The video was too grainy for positive identification, but the timing coincided perfectly with Karen's settlement rejection. 2 days later, Emma discovered nails scattered across our driveway in a pattern designed to puncture tires. The deliberate placement, concentrated near the garage where we'd naturally drive, showed premeditation that transformed vandalism into assault on our daily lives. "Dad, I'm scared," Emma admitted while we swept metal fragments from the asphalt. "What if she escalates to something worse?" That's when I made the decision to temporarily move Emma to Mrs. Patterson's house for her safety. Watching my daughter pack clothes because of neighborhood terrorism filled me with a rage that made Afghanistan deployments seem peaceful by comparison. County Building Inspector Phillips showed up for another random safety check, the third in 2 months. His weary expression suggested he knew exactly who was filing these bogus reports. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, clipboard in hand, but voice sympathetic. "I've inspected your property more times than some commercial facilities. Everything's perfect, as usual. Whoever's calling these complaints in is wasting taxpayer money." But Karen's harassment network extended beyond anonymous phone calls. Several of my regular contracting clients received concerned citizen warnings about hiring unlicensed contractors under investigation. The calls were professionally scripted, mentioning specific job sites and claiming knowledge of safety violations that didn't exist. My business income dropped 40% as nervous customers chose other electricians rather than risk involvement in what appeared to be regulatory problems. Karen was systematically destroying my livelihood while hiding behind anonymous accusations. The psychological warfare reached new depths when I caught Karen parked across the creek with professional-grade surveillance equipment. Binoculars, telephoto camera, notebook. She'd transformed stalking into a suburban intelligence operation. When I walked to my fence line and waved, she didn't retreat, but instead took photographs of me photographing her. Brad's panic was more visible but equally destructive. Neighbors reported seeing him burning documents in his backyard fire pit, filling the evening air with smoke that smelled like secrets going up in flames. The county ethics investigation into his conflict of interest was accelerating, and his desperate evidence destruction was being documented by the same neighbors he'd helped Karen terrorize. Emma's friend Madison provided regular intelligence updates about increasing chaos at Karen's house. Shouting matches between Karen and Brad, visits from expensive lawyers, and phone calls that ended with Karen screaming about ungrateful neighbors and conspiracy theories. "Madison says Karen's been crying a lot," Emma reported during one of our evening check-ins. "She keeps saying everyone's ganging up on her unfairly." The beautiful irony was that Karen's escalating desperation was providing evidence for every charge we planned to file. Each act of sabotage, each anonymous threat, each attempt at business interference was being documented and preserved for the legal reckoning that was approaching like a flood tide. But Karen's most dangerous moment was yet to come. Because desperate people make desperate choices, and Karen was running out of legal options just as her financial world was collapsing around her. The creek kept flowing toward her house, carrying the scent of justice that she could probably smell but refused to acknowledge. Some people learn from their mistakes. Others double down until they destroy themselves completely. Karen was definitely in the second category. The County Planning Commission's public hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening that would determine whether Karen's suburban empire survived or crumbled into well-deserved ruins. Karen arrived early, transforming the municipal building's sterile conference room into her personal war room. She'd hired a presentation consultant, borrowed money for maximum visual impact, and wore an expensive business suit that screamed respectable homeowner under attack by dangerous outsiders. Her PowerPoint presentation was a masterpiece of suburban propaganda. Color-coded charts showing alleged property value decline, professional photographs of my workshop shot from unflattering angles to maximize industrial threat, and testimonials from 3 neighbors who'd apparently been promised lower HOA fees for their cooperation. The woman had transformed harassment into performance art. Emma and Madison sat in the back row, phones recording everything with the dedication of war correspondents documenting history. Mrs. Patterson organized our supporting witnesses, families Karen had terrorized over the years, while Janet prepared legal responses to whatever fiction Karen was about to present. Sarah Morgan brought a photographer for her investigative follow-up story, turning the hearing into the public spectacle Karen had desperately wanted to avoid. The smell of nervous sweat and desperate ambition filled the room as Karen realized her private harassment campaign was about to become front-page news. Karen's opening performance was pure theater, emotional appeals about protecting family neighborhoods from commercial intrusion, complete with crocodile tears and dramatic gestures toward charts showing her manufactured property value crisis. This illegal business operation, she declared, pointing at blown-up photos of my workshop, has endangered our children's safety and destroyed the community standards that hardworking families depend on to protect their investments. The audience murmured appreciatively until the county engineer stood up and shattered Karen's presentation with a single question. Ma'am, according to your survey measurements, this property extends 30 feet into Willow Creek. Are you claiming the creek moved? Yet, Karen's consultant scrambled to explain boundary shift calculations, while the professional surveyor in the audience visibly winced. The technical impossibility of Karen's claims became obvious to everyone except Karen herself, who doubled down with increasingly desperate geographic theories. My response was deliberately measured. No emotional appeals, just facts laid out with military precision. Original property deed from 1970, professional survey showing 47 feet between my workshop and HOA jurisdiction. Environmental impact study, proving intentional exclusion for flood zone protection. The bombshell witness testimony began with Mrs. Patterson's cassette recordings. The ancient tape player's speakers crackled to life, filling the room with Karen's own voice from March 2022. That contractor's property technically isn't included in our jurisdiction, but he'll never fight us. Working people can't afford lawyers. Karen's face went white as her own words condemned her. But the recording continued. We just keep the pressure up until he complies or moves away. It's worked on 3 other families. The handwriting expert's testimony was devastating. Using projected images that filled the entire wall, he demonstrated how Robert Hendricks's signature had been forged 6 months after his death. The analysis was so clear that even non-experts could see the simulation marks where someone had copied from another document. The pressure patterns and hesitation marks indicate deliberate forgery, he explained, pointing to microscopic evidence of Karen's crime. The deceased date eliminates any possibility of legitimate execution. Karen's meltdown began during the environmental engineer's testimony about creek ecosystem damage from her illegal boundary modifications. She interrupted witnesses with increasingly hostile objections, accusing everyone of conspiracy against hard-working suburban families. This is all fake news and paid testimony, she shouted, standing up despite the commission chair's warnings. These people are lying to protect their illegal friend. But the final nail in Karen's coffin came from an unexpected source, the HOA management company representative, who confirmed they'd discovered systematic financial irregularities and were terminating Willowbrook's contract immediately. We found evidence of unauthorized legal fee assessments, misappropriated funds, and violations of fiduciary responsibility, the representative testified. Mrs. Whitmore has been using association funds for personal legal battles without board approval. Karen's complete breakdown was spectacular. She grabbed the microphone, refusing to yield the floor while screaming about conspiracies and persecution. Security officers had to physically escort her from the building while she shouted threats about getting revenge on every lying neighbor. The commission's unanimous vote was swift and merciless. Willowbrook Estates HOA Incorporation was fraudulent and legally void. All actions against excluded properties were invalid. Environmental remediation was required immediately. Criminal referrals would be forwarded to the district attorney. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Morgan interviewed me while Karen attempted a counter-interview that devolved into incoherent ranting about veteran conspiracies and corrupt officials. The contrast was stark. Measured responses to legal victory versus unhinged accusations from someone whose world was collapsing. The immediate consequences rippled through the neighborhood like a controlled demolition. All HOA fines and liens were legally nullified. Harassed families became eligible for restitution damages. Brad was suspended from his county position pending criminal investigation. The crowd outside celebrated Karen's downfall with the enthusiasm usually reserved for sports victories. Mrs. Patterson organized an impromptu barbecue that filled the evening air with the smell of justice and charcoal smoke. Karen's suburban dictatorship had lasted exactly 1 public hearing longer than it should have. But the best part? This was just the beginning of her legal troubles. The packed county commission chamber buzzed with the electric energy of a community finally ready to witness justice. Standing room only, news cameras rolling, and Sarah Morgan's explosive investigative article, HOA Fraud Exposed, How One Couple Terrorized a Neighborhood, had hit the internet that morning like a digital bomb. The district attorney's office sent an observer, notepad ready to document anything that might strengthen their criminal case. Local TV crews positioned cameras to capture every moment of what everyone suspected would be Karen's final public performance. Karen arrived fashionably late with her final gambit, an expensive consultant whose job was apparently to make fraud look professional. She'd prepared a PowerPoint about property rights and family values that would have been laughable if it wasn't so desperately pathetic. Her 3 remaining supporters, down from the dozens she'd promised, sat in the front row like the last passengers on a sinking ship. Everyone else had either joined our side or developed sudden urgent business elsewhere. The commission faced a legal nightmare wrapped in suburban drama. Clear evidence of fraudulent incorporation, environmental violations requiring immediate federal attention, ongoing criminal investigations, and enough media scrutiny to end political careers if handled incorrectly. Karen spoke first, delivering an emotional performance about neighborhood stability that would have impressed community theater directors. She claimed my commercial operation threatened children's safety, showed photos of my workshop equipment as evidence of industrial hazards, and demanded the commission override environmental concerns to protect hardworking families. This veteran, she said, pointing at me like I was carrying plague, has brought outside agitators and radical lawyers to destroy the community values that made Willowbrook a safe place for children. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who'd forged dead men's signatures was lecturing about community values. My presentation was methodical, chronological, and devastating. Original 1940s property deed establishing boundaries that predated her neighborhood by 3 decades. The 1970s house construction that occurred before Karen was even born. The 2009 environmental study that explicitly excluded my property for flood protection. Then came the smoking gun. The 2010 fraudulent incorporation with forged signatures that proved Karen and Brad had knowingly violated federal environmental law for personal profit. The witness parade was a masterclass in systematic evidence presentation. Mrs. Patterson's complete audio archive played Karen's own voice admitting to targeting working families. The professional surveyor demonstrated boundary measurements using actual equipment, making Karen's fake claims look ridiculous. The environmental engineer's testimony about flood zone risks captivated the audience with scientific evidence that Karen's modifications had endangered the entire neighborhood. Former county planner Williams described Brad's intimidation tactics with the weary voice of someone who'd watched corruption destroy public service. But the nuclear moment came when Janet presented our newly discovered smoking gun, the original subdivision developer agreement that both Karen and Brad had signed in 2010, explicitly acknowledging my property's exclusion from HOA jurisdiction. "Ladies and gentlemen," Janet announced, holding up the document like evidence in a murder trial, "this proves they knew the exclusion was intentional and legal. Everything that followed was deliberate fraud." Karen's complete breakdown was spectacular theater. She interrupted the presentation screaming about lies and conspiracies, accused the commission of being bought and paid for by outside interests, and grabbed the microphone while security moved to restrain her. "This is all fake news," she shrieked, waving her arms like she was conducting an invisible orchestra of outrage. "These people are destroying American neighborhoods with their radical agenda." The commission chair's gavel pounded repeatedly as Karen refused to yield the floor, her voice cracking with hysteria while security officers approached. The final image of her HOA presidency was being physically escorted from a public building while shouting incoherent threats about getting revenge on every traitor neighbor. The unanimous vote was swift and merciless. Willowbrook Estates HOA incorporation was fraudulent. All actions against excluded properties were legally void. Environmental remediation was mandatory for creek protection. Criminal referrals were forwarded immediately to the district attorney. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Morgan's interview captured the perfect contrast. My measured response: "Sometimes standing up to bullies protects everyone who can't fight back." Emma appeared briefly, supporting her father's courage with teenage dignity that made me prouder than any military commendation. Karen's attempted counter-interview was pure chaos. Rambling accusations about veteran conspiracies, corrupt officials, and radical lawyers destroying American values. The footage would become a viral sensation within hours, cementing her reputation as the neighborhood tyrant who lost her mind on live television. The immediate consequences rippled through Willowbrook like a controlled demolition. All HOA fines and liens were legally nullified. Harassed families became eligible for substantial restitution damages. Brad faced suspension from his county position and probable criminal charges. The crowd outside celebrated with the enthusiasm of people who'd finally seen justice triumph over petty tyranny. Mrs. Patterson organized an impromptu barbecue that filled the evening air with smoke and satisfaction. The creek bubbled its approval, flowing past Karen's house where for sale signs would appear within the week. But the sweetest moment came when Emma hugged me outside the courthouse, whispering, "Dad, you didn't just win. You saved everyone." Sometimes the good guys actually do win, and sometimes it happens on live television. 6 months after Karen's spectacular courtroom breakdown, justice arrived with the beautiful sound of handcuffs clicking and bank accounts being seized. Karen and Brad both faced multiple felony charges that read like a masterclass in suburban corruption: fraud, conspiracy, harassment, and document forgery. The district attorney, energized by undeniable evidence and public outrage, pushed for maximum penalties that would echo through HOA boardrooms statewide. Karen's plea bargain was poetry in legal form: 18 months probation, full restitution to every family she'd terrorized, community service cleaning the very creek she'd tried to destroy, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. Brad lost his county position, faced professional licensing revocation, and watched his construction empire collapse as clients fled faster than rats from a sinking ship. My countersuit settlement, let's just say Emma's college fund went from community college maybe to any university she wants. 3 other families received enough restitution to erase years of forced modifications and emotional trauma. But the real victory was watching Willowbrook transform from a surveillance state into an actual community. The neighborhood reorganized as the voluntary Willowbrook Neighbors Association, with Mrs. Patterson as our unanimously elected president. Her first act? Establishing the annual Willow Creek Environmental Festival, where families gather to celebrate conservation instead of measuring grass height with rulers. My workshop became community headquarters, where the smell of coffee mingles with sawdust and genuine laughter. We plan charity drives, organize youth baseball teams, and hold monthly potlucks that would have given Karen stress ulcers. Emma loves hosting her friends here, their voices filling spaces that once echoed with tension and fear. The environmental restoration exceeded everyone's dreams. Great blue herons returned to the creek for the first time in decades, their majestic calls replacing Karen's shrill complaints. River otters play in water that runs clean again, while kingfishers dive for fish that thrive without chemical runoff from obsessively maintained lawns. The ripple effects spread far beyond our neighborhood. Sarah Morgan's investigation uncovered 12 other fraudulent HOA incorporations across 3 states. The resulting legislation, dubbed the Willowbrook Act, requires independent oversight for all new HOA formations and mandatory financial transparency for existing boards. Attorney Janet now specializes in HOA fraud cases, using our template to liberate other communities from petty dictatorships. Veterans organizations teach our legal strategies in workshops titled "Defeating Domestic Terrorists with Clipboards." But my favorite outcome is watching Emma's confidence bloom. She testifies at state legislative hearings about HOA reform with the poise of someone who learned early that standing up to bullies protects everyone who can't fight back. Karen's fate was exactly what she deserved. Foreclosure claimed her McMansion, Brad divorced her to escape the scandal, and she moved to a cramped apartment where nobody measures her grass or times her garbage placement. Neighbors occasionally spot her driving past her former kingdom, but she never stops, probably afraid we'd all come outside to wave. The Willowbrook Creek Environmental Scholarship now sends local students to study conservation law, funded by settlement money that Karen inadvertently provided through her crimes. Our annual Property Rights Day festival draws families from 5 counties who want to celebrate communities built on cooperation instead of control. Mrs. Patterson finished her neighborhood history with a chapter titled "How One Tyrant United 50 Families Against Suburban Fascism." It's required reading for anyone considering HOA board service in our county. Last month, a homeowner from Arizona called about similar harassment. Emma suggested we start a nonprofit helping HOA victims fight back with proven legal strategies. The Free the Neighborhoods Foundation launches next spring, but that's definitely a story for another time. Right now, I'm watching sunset paint the creek gold while Emma and her friends build rope swings that would have violated 17 imaginary regulations under Karen's regime. The sound of genuine community fills air that once carried threats and intimidation. This is what America should sound like: kids laughing, neighbors helping neighbors, and nobody measuring anyone's grass with rulers. Your turn. Drop your wildest HOA horror stories in the comments below. Have you faced down a neighborhood dictator? I read every comment and love hearing how other communities fought back. Share this story with anyone dealing with HOA harassment. Knowledge is power, and bullies only win when good people stay silent. Hit that subscribe button for HOA Stories. We're exposing petty tyrants and celebrating communities that fight back. Because unfortunately, there's never a shortage of Karens who need reminding that property rights trump their personal convenience. Next week, how a retired teacher dissolved an HOA by proving their president embezzled $200,000 in landscaping fees. Trust me, you won't want to miss that takedown. Remember, the best defense against neighborhood dictators is refusing to be intimidated by people whose only power comes from clipboards and bad attitudes.
That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.